Influence of the Renaissance, Part 3. Voyages of Discovery. The ruins of St. Paul's in Macau is not only a standing testimony to the religious conflict between the European Catholics and Protestants 5 centuries ago and the missionaries' work in Asia. It is also a standing testimony to the achievements made by the European explorers to find new sea routes to Asia. The authors of our textbook also believed that one impact of the Renaissance was the voyages of discovery. According to the authors of our textbook, under the influence of humanism, Renaissance people wanted to know more about the world they live in. From the 15th centuries onwards, European explorers made a number of voyages. In the end, they discovered new sea routes to the east and new places that the Europeans never heard of before, such as North America and South America. The voyages of these explorers were called the Voyages of Discovery. Now, the explanation of our authors clearly indicated that the aim of the Voyages of Discovery was to discover new sea routes to the east. Now, that meant the Europeans might be unhappy with the old route. So, what was the old route to the east? Now, actually, the old route was the Silk Road. For a long time in the past, the Silk Road was the important route between Europe and Asia. This road was very important to the trade and exchange between Europe and Asia. Goods were actually transported from Asia along the Silk Road and reached Europe. Certainly, some goods may also be transported by sea to Italy, where the goods would be redistributed to other European countries. However, from the 1400s to the 1700s, some European countries or some European governments decided to sponsor some explorers to sail eastward and westward. Now, why did the European government decide to support these explorers to sail eastward and westward? Were these European monarchs interested in the world which we are living in? Why would the European explorers decide to disregard the challenges and dangers during the trip and decided to go on such explorations? Are they also interested in the world which we are living in, as claimed by the authors of our textbook? Now, this is the focus and the topic of this video: the motivations behind the Europeans' desire to explore our world. Now, before we go deep into our discussion, maybe we can recall something that we have learned from the previous videos. In the previous video, we have talked about this picture, the money changer and his wife, and we concluded from this picture that the people of the Renaissance time would value highly personal achievements. And certainly, personal achievements would also involve personal successes or business successes, which means they were able to obtain new sources of wealth from Asia. Now, so this was one of the factors motivating the Europeans to start some trips of exploration to find new sea routes to Asia. This was the gold factor, and you may also understand it as money factor. So what did the Europeans want from Asia? Now, actually, what the Europeans wanted from Asia was the precious goods from Asia, which would include silk, spices, porcelain, and precious stones. And these goods were actually transported to Europe in the past through the Silk Road. However, as the Silk Road cuts across various countries in Asia, and even if some goods are transported by sea, but these goods would be first brought to Italy, where the goods would be redistributed to other European countries. So, some European countries believed that, or some European merchants believed that, well, a lot of middlemen could make money or make large sum of money out of the trade between Europe and Asia, and these Muslim merchants and Italian merchants would affect the profit enjoyed by the European merchants. Therefore, some European merchants would like to look for quick and direct trade routes to Asia so that they could be able to avoid the Muslim and Italian merchants. And in such case, they would be able to increase their profits. So this was the money factor or the gold factor behind the Europeans' trips of exploration to find new sea routes to Asia. Now, other than the gold factor, there was also a glory factor motivating the Europeans to go on different trips of explorations. Glory could mean personal glory. Some Europeans decided to go on different trips of exploration because they believed that such explorations would provide them with opportunities to get rid of poverty and become rich. Certainly, by becoming rich, they would also become famous. At the same time, some European kings who sponsored the voyages of exploration would also want to claim glory for their country by gaining overseas colonies and new sources of wealth for the nation. They believed that through acquiring colonies and new sources of wealth for their nations, their countries would become more powerful. Now, other than the gold and glory factor, the God factor was also important. Some European Christians, or maybe the Christian kings in Europe, especially the Catholic ones, they wanted to stop the spread of Islam and convert the non-Christians in places like Asia to the Christian faith. So the explorers were encouraged to spread Christianity or bring missionaries who could focus only on conversions. Now, out of religious reason, therefore, some European monarchs decided to support explorers to go on different trips of exploration to find new sea routes to Asia. Here I would like to add one point. The European monarchs, or particularly the Christian monarchs, believed that there was a king in Asia that could ally with them to fight against the Muslim. Certainly this was not true, but this was their belief. And so they decided to support some explorers to find new sea routes to Asia in order to get into contact with this Christian king in Asia. Now, so this was the God factor behind the age of exploration. Now, to sum up, we can conclude that there were three factors motivating the European monarchs to support the voyages of discovery and some Europeans to go on such explorations. They were the gold factor, the glory factor, and the God factor. So, gold, God, and glory, the 3G factors. Now, despite the 3G factors, the Europeans could not go on any trips of exploration without technological advancement. Actually, for a long time before the Renaissance, sailors in Europe did not have the technology to sail far away from Europe and return. Europeans were never the first to explore the oceans in search of new trade routes. Islamic merchants explored the Indian Ocean and had dominated the Asian spice trade for centuries before the European exploration. And in fact, from 1405 to 1433, Zheng He of China led their treasure fleet on 7 expeditions to Southeast Asia, India, and Africa during the Ming Dynasty. And when you take a look at this picture, you can be able to tell how advanced the Chinese shipbuilding industry was in the time of the 15th century. This was a ship built by the Chinese in the early 15th century, and it was a lot more bigger than the flagship of Columbus, which was built in the late 15th century. This flagship was known as Santa Maria. Now, even though the Europeans, the Europeans were not very advanced in shipbuildings. However, with trade and cultural diffusion during the Renaissance, new navigation techniques were introduced into Europe, which would enable the Europeans to go on different trips of exploration. Such technological improvements included the use of magnetic compass, the use of astrolabe to enable the sailors to tell the directions at sea by observing the stars, and the acquisition of more geographical knowledge, which made it possible for the Europeans to make better and more accurate maps. Certainly, European shipbuilders were also able to build better ships, known as caravels. Now, with the three G factors motivating the Europeans to search for new sea routes to Asia, and the technological factors or advancement which made the trips possible, so the European sailors could do what the Muslims and Chinese explorers had never attempted to do in the late 15th century. They began their global exploration and created colonies in order to increase the wealth and power. Now, as we have said, different European countries supported different explorers to search for new sea routes to Asia, and one such country was Portugal. Now, Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal, decided to start a school of navigation to train sailors. In order to train some good sailors, he brought in Europe's best map makers, shipbuilders, and sailing instructors, with the hope that he could be able to discover new territories, finding great trade routes to Asia, so that he could expand the power of Portugal. Prince Henry's navigation school and willingness to fund voyages finally led the Portuguese to be the first to explore the west coast of Africa. Vasco da Gama was the first explorer to find a direct trade route to Asia by going around Africa to get to India. As a result, Portugal gained a sea route to Asia, and this brought them great wealth from Asia. Seeing the success of Portugal, the Spanish government decided that they should not be left out. The King and Queen of Spain decided to sponsor and support the overseas expeditions by supporting Columbus. Like most educated men of the Renaissance, Christopher Columbus, an Italian, was a believer that the world was round, and thought that he could be able to reach Asia by sailing westward. In fact, Columbus reached the Bahamas in America, but he thought that he had reached islands out off the coast of India. Totally, he made 4 trips to India, which was not, and he never knew that he was actually in America, and he had discovered a new world. Now, despite the fact that Columbus never found Asia, another Portuguese sailor who sailed with the support of the Spanish government, Ferdinand Magellan, thought that he could be able to reach Asia by sailing westward. Magellan became the first explorer to circumnavigate the world. Now, as a result of the efforts of these explorers, Portugal was able to create colonies along the African coast, Brazil, and the Spice Islands in Asia, whereas the Spanish were able to create colonies in North and South America. Now, the Spanish government also sent explorers to conquer the New World and destroy some empires in America, like the Aztec empires and the Inca empires. As a result, the Spanish were able to obtain large amounts of gold from America, which transformed them into the most powerful country in Europe during the early years of the Age of Exploration. Spain and Portugal were certainly not the only 2 countries that supported different trips of exploration. England, France, and the Netherlands were also involved in these overseas exploration and colonization. Now, taking England as an example, they were able to form colonies along the Atlantic coast of North America. These colonies were motivated by religious or economic factors to go to America to set up colonies. Other than the British, the French also set up colonies in Quebec and the Mississippi region. Now, unlike other European nations, the English colonies were paid for by citizens who formed joint stock companies and not by the kings. Another English explorer, James Cook, was also the first European to make contact with Australia, New Zealand, and Hawaii. Now, like England, the Netherlands allowed private companies to fund exploration. So they set up colonies in America, Africa, and the Dutch East India Company dominated the trade in Asia. Now, so as a result of the age of exploration, the European knowledge about the world increased greatly. Now, when we refer to this map, we can be able to tell the known areas to the Europeans. Now, by the time of 500 BC, that is about the time of the Roman Kingdom or early Roman Republic, the Europeans would only know areas around the Roman Kingdom and ancient Greece. They may also be able to know something about Africa and some parts of Asia. Now, their geographical knowledge did not extend much during the Middle Ages or even during the early Renaissance. However, during the age of exploration, the geographical knowledge of the Europeans extended greatly because of the result of the exploration trips. They would be able to explore the oceans in the world, and certainly the Europeans' knowledge about the world would greatly expand as a result of the work of different explorers. Alongside with the increase of geographical knowledge, the European influence over the world also increased greatly. This idea was also shared by a Japanese historian, Gongkei Zhengsheng, Miyazaki Masakatsu. Now, in his book 從空間解讀的世界史, he believed that the use of animals would extend the geographical knowledge of our ancestors, and different parts of the world were also linked with the use of animals. However, the age of exploration provided human beings with the first opportunity to explore the oceans, which enable the era of capitalism to start. And certainly, with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the era of the integration of the whole world could be made possible. So this is the general idea of this Japanese historian, and we could also conclude from this discussion that, well, the age of exploration was really an important chapter in the human history. So you can be able to conclude that whether or not it is proper for us to say that the Europeans decided to go on different trips of exploration because they wanted to know more about the world. Certainly, in the examinations, you can still cover the points brought up by the authors of our textbook. Goodbye for now.